"Could I sleep in your barn tonight?" the young woman asked. "Just until morning. I can work for it." Silas Ward looked at her across the fading Wyoming light. She could not have been more than 24. Dust covered the hem of her brown traveling dress, and one sleeve had been stitched so many times that the original seam was almost impossible to find. Damp strands of dark hair had escaped the knot at the back of her neck. Her face was too fine for the hardship written across it, with high cheekbones, clear hazel eyes, and the exhausted stillness of someone who had learned not to waste hope. At her feet sat one small valise. Nothing else. No wagon, no horse, no family waiting down the road. Behind Silas, the Red Willow Ranch stretched toward a line of purple hills. The September grass had gone pale from drought. The cottonwoods along the creek showed more dust than green, and the tall wooden windmill beside the stock tank turned with an uneven squeal, pumping water so slowly that 3 thirsty horses stood waiting around the trough. Silas glanced toward the barn, then back at the stranger. "No," he said. The young woman's fingers tightened around the handle of her valise. She gave one small nod, as though rejection was familiar territory. "I understand." She bent to pick up her bag. Silas stepped off the porch. "You won't sleep in the barn." She stopped. "The north room has a bed," he continued. "Door locks from the inside. Supper's in 10 minutes. For the first time since she had appeared at the gate, the young woman looked completely unguarded. "I wasn't asking for charity, Mr. Ward. Mr. Ward, I can pay with work. Then tomorrow you can tell me what work you know." He picked up her valise before she could object. "Tonight you can eat." That was how Mara Ellison entered Red Willow Ranch on the evening of the 17th of September 1889, believing she needed only one night beneath a safe roof. Neither she nor Silas understood that before winter came, one of them would save the other's land, and the other would teach her that a home was not something a person had to earn one humiliation at a time. Mara had been walking since noon. The freight wagon that carried her west from Cheyenne had broken an axle 9 miles from Red Willow. The driver intended to remain with the cargo until another team arrived, but Mara had seen dark clouds gathering over the western ridge and decided to continue on foot. She had been headed toward the railroad town of Laramie, where she hoped to find work at a hotel or a general store, anywhere that did not know her name. Anywhere no one remembered that her father had died owing money. Anywhere she would not hear whispers about the pretty surveyor's daughter who had once been expected to marry well and had instead spent 2 years selling furniture, tools, and finally the little house where she had been born. Her father, Amos Ellison, had never been a wealthy man. He had been a surveyor when there was surveying work and a wind pump mechanic when there was not. He could read land the way some men read newspapers. A depression in the grass, a line of cottonwoods, a certain shade of stone exposed on a hillside each told him something. Mara had followed him everywhere as a child. By 13, she could hold a survey chain straighter than most hired boys. By 16, she could dismantle the pumping head of a windmill without dropping a bolt into the well casing. By 20, she could sketch a property line from field notes and calculate an angle before the coffee cooled. Her father had taught her all of it because he had no son, and because it had never occurred to him that intelligence should be wasted on account of a skirt. What he had not taught her was how to survive his death. The fever took him in 6 days. The debts took everything else in 18 months. By the time Mara arrived at Red Willow, all she had left of him were a brass compass, a folded survey chain, and a small oilskin notebook filled with his handwriting. She had not opened the notebook in almost a year. At Silas Ward's table that evening, she ate beef stew, fresh bread, and boiled apples. She tried not to eat too quickly. Across from her sat a girl of 9 with copper-colored braids and a solemn expression. "This is my niece, Beth," Silas said. Beth studied Mara openly. "Are you lost?" "Beth." "What?" She came walking. Mara smiled despite herself. "I suppose I am a little lost." Beth considered that. "Uncle Silas gets lost too." "I do not." "You got lost looking for the gray mare." "The mare was lost." "You were looking for her, so you were both lost." Silas closed his eyes briefly. Mara laughed. It surprised her so much that she nearly dropped her spoon. The sound seemed to surprise Silas too. Something changed in his face, though only for a moment. Beth smiled with satisfaction and returned to her stew. Silas explained that Beth was his sister's daughter. Her mother had died 3 years earlier, and her father had been killed when a horse rolled on him the following spring. Since then, Beth and Silas had lived at Red Willow alone. There were hired men during branding and roundups, but none slept in the house. The silence that had settled there was not unhappy exactly. It was simply deep. Mara noticed things as she ate. She always noticed things. The kitchen was tidy but worn. One chair had been repaired twice. The stove door did not close properly. A crack in the window frame had been packed with cloth. On a shelf near the pantry sat 2 jars of preserved peaches and little else. Silas's boots were good leather but resoled. Beth's dress had been carefully let out at the hem. These were not poor people, but neither were they people with money to waste. Outside, the windmill squealed again. Mara's head turned instinctively. Silas noticed. "You know windmills?" "A little." It was the first lie, she told him. Silas said nothing. After supper, Mara stood and began gathering the dishes. "You're a guest tonight," Silas said. "I ate your food. And tomorrow you'll work, you said." "Yes." "Then tomorrow starts tomorrow." She stared at him. It was such a simple sentence. Yet she had spent the last 2 years in houses where every bite had been counted against her, every favor recorded, every kindness presented later as a debt. She slowly put the plate back down. Beth yawned. Silas sent her to wash before bed. Then he showed Mara upstairs. The north room was small, with a narrow iron bed, a washstand, and curtains faded nearly white by the sun. A blue quilt covered the mattress. Silas set her valise beside the bed. "There's a bolt on the door." Mara looked at it. He understood immediately why that mattered. "I won't come up unless the house is on fire," he said. "Beth might. She doesn't believe in knocking." From the hall came Beth's voice. "I heard that." Silas looked toward the ceiling. Mara smiled again. "Thank you." He nodded and started away. "Mr. Ward?" He turned. She wanted to explain that she had not expected this, that he had given her more than a room. He had given her something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Safety. But the words seemed too large to offer a man she had known for less than an hour. So she said only, "I'll earn my breakfast." Silas leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. For a moment, his expression softened. "Miss Ellison, you don't owe anyone for being treated decently." Then he walked away. Mara stood very still. Long after the house went quiet, she remained beside the bed with one hand resting on the blue quilt. She did not cry. She had become very good at not crying. But sometime after midnight, beneath a stranger's roof in the middle of Wyoming territory, Mara slept without pushing a chair against the door for the first time in months. At sunrise, she was already outside. Silas found her standing beside the windmill. The morning sky was pink above the eastern plains. Mara had pinned her hair securely and changed into an older gray dress. In one hand, she held a wrench she had found in the barn. Silas stopped at the fence. "I thought you knew a little about windmills." "I do. You've been staring at that one for 20 minutes. I'm deciding how many things are wrong with it." He folded his arms. "And 4 that I can see. Maybe 6. Silas almost smiled. The Red Willow windmill had been troubling him since June. The pump lost strength first. Then the wooden sucker rod began knocking inside the pipe. Twice, Silas had replaced leather seals. Neither repair lasted. The nearest mechanic wanted $15 simply to make the trip. $15 was money Silas did not have. Mara pointed upward. "See how the wheel shudders every 3rd turn?" "Yes. The tail isn't keeping it square to the wind. Your head is pulling sideways." She walked around the tower. "That's wearing the rod unevenly. I'd wager the lower coupling is bent too." "You can tell all that from the ground?" "My father could." "That wasn't what I asked." Mara looked at him. Then, for the first time, a little pride entered her voice. "Yes, By noon, Silas knew she had not exaggerated. Mara climbed the tower herself before he could stop her. She moved carefully, confidently, testing every rung before putting her weight on it. Silas stood below with his jaw tight. "If you fall, I'm going to be extremely annoyed." Mara looked down. "Because I'll be injured?" "Because I'll have to explain it to Beth." From the porch, Beth shouted, "I'm already watching." Silas muttered something Mara could not hear. She laughed. 2 hours later, they had the pumping head opened. Mara had been right. The rod was bent. The packing was worn. The main bearing had been running nearly dry, but it was the leather cups inside the pump cylinder that interested her most. "These were cut too thick," she said. Silas frowned. "I bought them in town. They're catching inside the barrel. Every stroke wastes force. Can you fix it?" Mara looked toward the barn. "Do you have harness leather?" By evening, the old windmill was drawing nearly twice as much water. The trough filled until it spilled over one edge. Beth clapped. Silas stood beside Mara, watching cattle push forward to drink. For weeks, each turn of the windmill had sounded like another problem he could not afford. Now it moved with a steady wooden rhythm. "How much would a mechanic charge for that?" he asked. $20 if he was honest. "And if he wasn't?" "30. Silas nodded. "Then you've paid for a month of breakfasts." Mara looked at him sharply. He was teasing her. The discovery pleased her more than it should have. "Careful, Mr. Ward. At that rate, I may stay until Christmas." He looked at her. The humor faded, replaced by something quieter. "You could." Mara turned away first. The days that followed settled around them almost without permission. Mara intended to leave after 3 nights. Then, after a week. Then, after she helped Beth finish the little blue dress she had been trying to sew for winter. Each morning brought some reason to stay until evening. Each evening made morning easier to imagine. She repaired 2 broken pump valves. She reorganized the smokehouse. She showed Beth how to measure distance by pacing. She discovered that Silas had a dry sense of humor he revealed, only when he trusted someone enough to risk it. Silas discovered that Mara could not cook biscuits without turning them into weapons. Beth discovered this before either of them, and informed the household loudly. The ranch itself was another matter. The drought had been building for 3 years. Red Willow had once watered its cattle from both the deep well near the barn and a narrow stream called Cottonwood Run, which crossed the northern pasture. That summer, Cottonwood Run had shrunk to a ribbon. Then, in August, it disappeared entirely. The well could support the house and perhaps half the herd through winter, not all of it. Silas had already sold 40 head early at a poor price. If there was no rain before the first freeze, he would have to sell more. Too many. Red Willow might survive 1 bad year. It would not survive another. The man who knew this best was Gideon Rusk. Rusk owned Bitter Creek Ranch to the north, 3 times the size of Red Willow. During the past 2 years, he had bought 4 smaller properties from families defeated by drought. He had made Silas an offer in July. Silas refused. Rusk returned in August with a smaller offer. Silas ordered him off the property. Then Cottonwood Run went dry. Mara first heard Rusk's name one evening when Silas came home carrying an envelope. He dropped it onto the table. Beth recognized the handwriting. "Is that the mean man?" "Beth, that means yes." Mara looked from the girl to Silas. He opened the letter. His face changed as he read it. Not much, but Mara had learned his silences. This one was angry. "What does he want?" she asked. "Same thing he wanted last month." "The ranch?" Silas looked at her. "He says the drought will finish me by spring. He's offering cash now." Mara glanced toward the window. Beyond the glass, the windmill turned in the moonlight. "Will it?" Silas did not pretend not to understand. Maybe. The answer frightened her. Not because she would lose a job. She still had no formal job. Not because she would have nowhere to go. She could always go somewhere. She had learned that much. What frightened her was how quickly Red Willow had become the first place she did not want to leave. The next morning, Mara saddled a mare. "Where are you going?" Silas asked. "To see where Cottonwood Run went. It dried up." Water goes somewhere. Sometimes it goes into the ground. Then I'll find where. He studied her. You always this stubborn? My father called it professional persistence. What did everyone else call it? Stubbornness. Silas saddled his horse. Mara raised an eyebrow. I thought I was going alone. I've seen you climb windmills. I know better now. They followed the old creek north. For 2 miles, the channel was dry. Mara dismounted repeatedly, kneeling to examine the soil. At one bend, she found damp nemus beneath 6 inches of dust. Farther north, the cottonwoods looked healthier. Then they reached a new fence. 3 strands of barbed wire crossed the creek bed. A sign had been nailed to a post. Bitter Creek Ranch. Silas's expression hardened. That fence wasn't there in spring. Mara walked along it. 50 yards west, she found a fresh corner post. Beyond it, the land rose gently toward Rusk's property. She took her father's brass compass from her pocket. Silas watched her. You carry that everywhere? Almost. She sighted toward a ridge, then toward an old lightning-scarred cottonwood. Her eyes narrowed. Do you have your deed? Yes. Field description? I suppose. Suppose? I own cows, Mara. I don't court paperwork. She gave him a look. What? That may be the most expensive sentence you've ever said. They returned to the ranch. For the rest of the afternoon, Mara searched through an iron box Silas kept beneath his bed. There were tax receipts, a marriage certificate belonging to Silas's parents, his sister's letters, Beth's birth record. And at the bottom, tied with a ribbon, the original survey description of Red Willow Ranch. Mara carried it downstairs. She spread the paper across the kitchen table. Silas leaned over one shoulder. Beth leaned over the other. This says your northern boundary crosses Cottonwood Run, almost half a mile beyond that new fence. Silas frowned. You're sure? No. He straightened. Then Mara smiled faintly. I'm very sure. The next day, she returned with Silas, a shovel, her father's chain, and a notebook. They measured from the western marker, then again, then a third time. The numbers agreed. Gideon Rusk's fence stood nearly 700 feet inside Red Willow land. Silas stared north. That son of a... Uncle Silas. He looked at Beth, who had insisted on coming. That son of an unfortunate mother. Beth seemed satisfied. Mara walked farther up the dry creek bed. She stopped. Something about the ground bothered her. The channel was too dry on their side of the fence. But beyond the fence, willows grew thick. She climbed through the wire. Silas followed. 100 yards upstream, hidden behind brush, they found a narrow diversion trench. Someone had stacked stone and packed earth across part of Cottonwood Run, turning the remaining flow eastward toward Bitter Creek land. The water was not abundant, but it was water. Silas stood staring at it. His hands curled into fists. Mara felt anger too, but hers was colder. Rusk had not merely waited for Red Willow to fail. He had helped it fail. Silas stepped toward the obstruction. Mara caught his arm. No, his eyes flashed. That water belongs in the creek, and that land may still be disputed. My boundary is something we can prove. Let's prove it before you give Rusk a reason to call you a trespasser. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Mara released him. Silas took a breath. You sound like your father. You never met him. I feel like I'm beginning to. They rode home with a plan. Silas would travel to the county seat and file a formal complaint using the original survey description. Mara would remain at Red Willow with Beth and 2 ranch hands who had arrived to help gather cattle. Before leaving, Silas stood beside his horse longer than necessary. You'll keep the door bolted? Yes. And you won't go north? Yes. And if Rusk comes here, I'll be polite. Silas stared at her. Mara smiled. As polite as necessary. That doesn't comfort me. It wasn't meant to. He almost laughed. Then his expression changed. Mara. Yes? This is my fight. She understood what he was trying to give her. Freedom from obligation. A way to step back. She looked toward the ranch house. Beth was on the porch waving. The windmill turned steadily behind her. "No," Mara said softly. "It was your fight." Silas said nothing. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he reached down and covered Mara's hand with his. It lasted only a second, but when he rode away, both of them felt the absence of that touch. Rusk came the following afternoon. Mara saw 4 riders approaching from the north. Gideon Rusk rode at the front. He was a broad man in his 50s with a silver beard and an expensive black hat. 2 hired men followed him. The 4th rider drove a wagon carrying fence posts. Beth appeared at Mara's elbow. "Is that the mean man?" "Yes, I knew it. Go inside." "But—" "Now, sweetheart." Beth obeyed. Mara stepped off the porch. Rusk dismounted. "So you're Ward's new house girl?" "Mara Ellison." He glanced at the survey chain coiled beside the porch. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I hear you've been wandering my property." "Mr. Ward's property," Rusk smiled. "Young lady, I've owned that ground north of the creek for 12 years. Then you should know where it begins." The smile vanished. One of his men shifted uncomfortably. Rusk looked toward the house. "Where's Ward?" "Away." "Convenient. For him or for you?" Rusk took a step closer. Mara's heart beat hard. She was afraid. Only a fool would not have been. But fear and surrender had never been the same thing. Rusk pointed toward the north pasture. "We're moving that fence south another 100 yards. My surveyor says the line was marked wrong." "Your surveyor is wrong." "You a surveyor now?" "My father was." "Your father isn't here." "No." Mara reached for the folded paper on the porch rail. "But his daughter is." She handed Rusk a copy of Silas's field description. Then she pointed toward the low western ridge. "Your corner begins at the limestone marker beneath that ridge. The line runs east by north 6 degrees to the cottonwood marked with 2 cuts. I measured it yesterday." Rusk did not look at the paper. "I don't care what you measured. You might care what we uncovered." That got his attention. Mara turned to one of the hired men. "You have a shovel?" The man looked at Rusk. "Don't," Rusk said. Mara picked up her own shovel. "Then, I'll do it." She walked toward the pasture. Rusk followed. So did the men. At the base of a small rise, Mara stopped beside a patch of disturbed soil. She had found it that morning. She drove the shovel into the earth. 3 inches down, it struck stone. She cleared away the dirt. A square granite marker emerged, weathered but unmistakable. On its face was an old survey cross. Mara stood. "This is the original northern marker for Red Willow." One hired man took off his hat and scratched his head. Rusk's face darkened. "It proves nothing. It proves enough that I wouldn't drive a new fence until the county surveyor arrives." She looked at the men. "Would you?" Neither answered. That silence was answer enough. Rusk turned on them. "I'm paying you." "For fencing," one man said cautiously. "Not for getting arrested over landlines." Rusk looked back at Mara. For the first time, she saw something beneath his anger. Worry. He knew the marker was real. He knew the diversion ditch could be found. And he knew Silas was no longer ignorant of either. "You think you've won something?" Rusk asked. Mara met his gaze. "No." Her voice was calm. "I think you expected a tired rancher to lose slowly enough that no one would notice you helping him." The hired men looked at Rusk. His face reddened. Mara continued. "You were counting on silence, Mr. Rusk." She glanced back toward the house where Beth watched from behind the curtain. "You chose the wrong ranch." Rusk mounted his horse. "This country eats people like you." Mara looked at him. Once, she might have believed that. Not anymore. "Then I suppose it will have to chew harder." One of the hired men coughed to hide a laugh. Rusk wheeled his horse and rode north. His men followed. The wagon of fence posts followed them empty. Only when they disappeared did Mara realize her hands were shaking. Beth ran from the house. "You made the mean man leave." Mara crouched and hugged her. "Yes." "Were you scared?" Mara looked toward the empty road. "Very." Beth frowned. "You didn't look scared. That's because courage and fear often wear the same face from a distance." Silas returned 2 days later with the county surveyor and a deputy. The old marker was verified before sunset. The following morning, they rode north and opened the diversion. Water trickled back into Cottonwood Run. It was not a flood. It was barely a stream. But when the first thin sheet of water crossed back onto Red Willow land, Silas stood beside Mara without speaking. The cattle found it by afternoon. Within a week, Rusk was ordered to remove his fence from the disputed ground. The county began investigating the diversion. He did not return to Red Willow. The drought did not magically end. Winter still promised to be difficult. But with the creek restored and the windmill repaired, Silas no longer had to sell the heart of his herd. The ranch would live. That evening, after Beth had gone to bed, Mara sat alone on the porch. The night was cold enough for a shawl. Stars covered the sky. Silas came outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. "You were supposed to stay out of trouble." "I stayed on the ranch." "That is not the same thing." "I was very polite." "I heard." She looked at him. "From whom?" "The deputy." Mara smiled into her cup. Silas sat beside her. For a while they listened to the wind moving through the cottonwoods. "You saved this place," he said. "No, Mara, you would have fought for it." "I didn't know where to fight." She turned toward him. Silas looked older in the moonlight, not weak, just tired in a way she had not noticed when she first arrived. He had carried Red Willow alone for years. His sister's child, the cattle, the drought, the debts, every broken fence and empty creek. He had mistaken carrying everything alone for strength because no one had ever taught him another definition. Mara understood that kind of mistake. She had made it herself. Silas stared toward the pasture. "The night you came here, you asked to sleep in my barn." "I remember. I thought you needed saving." Mara raised an eyebrow. "I did need a bed." He smiled. Then his expression grew serious again. "You fixed my windmill. Found my boundary. Stood in front of Gideon Rusk when I wasn't here to do it myself. You gave me somewhere safe enough to remember what I knew." Silas looked at her. The truth of that struck him harder than praise would have. Mara had not arrived empty. She had arrived exhausted. There was a difference. He had not given her intelligence. He had simply stopped demanding that she spend all of it surviving. "Mara," he said quietly, "what happens when spring comes?" She looked down at her coffee. "I don't know." The answer hurt both of them. Silas set his cup aside. "I do." She looked up. "I want you here." "As what?" The question frightened her more than Rusk had. Silas understood. He chose his words carefully. "Not because you owe me." Mara said nothing. "Not because I need someone to fix pumps." A little smile touched her mouth. "Though that's useful." "Very." The smile faded. Silas continued. "I want you here because this house changes when you walk into it." Beth laughs more. I laugh more, apparently, which is alarming. Mara's eyes shone. "And when something goes wrong," he said, "you're the first person I want beside me." He reached for her hand. "I spent years thinking a man had to build a life before he could ask anyone into it." His fingers closed around hers. "Turns out I was only building half of one." Mara could not speak. Silas looked toward the dark outline of the barn. "I'm not asking you to stay as a guest." Her breath caught. "I'm asking whether you might consider staying as my partner." He paused. "In the ranch first, if that's all you want." Mara gave a watery laugh. "And if it isn't?" Silas looked directly into her eyes. "Then I have a question I've been trying not to ask too soon." She squeezed his hand. "You're a patient man, Silas. I've been told I'm slow." "By whom?" "Beth." Repeatedly. Mara laughed. The sound carried into the night. Then she leaned closer. "You may ask me in the spring." Silas nodded solemnly. "All right. And Silas?" "Yes?" "You don't actually have to wait until spring." He stared at her. It took him 3 seconds. Mara counted every one. Then he kissed her. Beth announced the next morning that she had known all along. They married in December. There were no grand flowers, no expensive dress, no crowd from 3 counties. Mara wore dark green wool. Beth carried dried sunflowers she had saved from summer. Silas wore the only black coat he owned. The ceremony took place in the ranch house, because the first heavy snow had closed the road to town. The county judge happened to be stranded overnight at Red Willow and declared it either Providence or extremely poor travel planning. Beth chose Providence. Mara chose both. Years passed. Red Willow changed slowly. That suited the people who lived there. A second windmill rose above the southern pasture. Cottonwood Run was fenced carefully but never blocked. Beth grew tall and fearless. She learned surveying from Mara and horses from Silas, and developed the unfortunate confidence of a child raised by two adults who had taught her to think for herself. The ranch prospered. Not extravagantly. Honestly, there were good years and bad ones. Calves were lost. Fences broke. Snow came too early twice. But burdens no longer belonged to one person. That was the difference. 6 years after Mara first walked to Red Willow, a thunderstorm rolled across the plains in late May. Rain hammered the roof. Silas was in the barn with Beth, now 15, tending a mare about to foal. Mara stood in the kitchen with their 4-year-old son, Owen, when someone knocked at the door. She opened it. A girl stood on the porch, 17, perhaps 18, soaked through. Mud covered her shoes. She held a cloth bundle against her chest. Behind her, the road disappeared into rain. "Ma'am," the girl said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "my wagon left me 3 miles east. I can work. I can scrub floors or feed horses." Mara's heart tightened. For an instant, she saw another young woman standing in another doorway. Dust instead of rain. A worn valise instead of a bundle. Pride holding together what fear had nearly broken. The girl swallowed. "Could I sleep in your barn tonight?" Mara looked past her toward the barn, then back into the girl's frightened face. "No," she said. The girl's shoulders fell. Mara opened the door wider. "You'll sleep upstairs. There's a room with a lock on the inside." The girl stared at her. Mara smiled. "And supper will be ready soon." "I don't want charity." "I know." Mara took the wet bundle gently from her hands. "Tomorrow, sweetheart, you can tell us what you know how to do." Silas appeared across the yard, running through the rain toward the house. He stopped when he saw the stranger. Then he looked at Mara. He understood before she said a word. Years had passed, but some moments never truly left a person. They only waited until life offered the chance to answer them differently. Silas stepped onto the porch. "Everything all right?" Mara slipped her free hand into his. "Yes." Behind them, Red Willow glowed with lamplight. Owen was setting an extra plate on the table because in that house, children learned early that a stranger at the door might simply be family arriving before anyone knew her name. Outside, rain fell over the pastures. The windmills turned. Cottonwood Run ran full beneath the cottonwoods. And Mara thought of the frightened girl she had once been, asking for the smallest kindness she believed she was allowed to request. She had asked for one night in a barn. Instead, she had been given a locked door, a place at a table, and enough safety to become herself again. But that had never been the whole miracle. The greater gift was what happened afterward. Silas had opened a door for her. Mara had walked through it, carrying everything she already possessed: her intelligence, her courage, her stubbornness, her father's compass, and a heart that hardship had bent but never managed to break. Together, they had discovered something neither could have built alone. A ranch could be inherited. Land could be purchased. A house could be raised from timber and stone. But a home was made differently. It was made each time one person saw another carrying too much and reached for part of the weight. It was made when kindness came without humiliation, when love did not demand repayment. When two people stopped asking who had saved whom and simply chose, day after day, to stand on the same side. Mara watched the young stranger warm her hands beside the stove. Then, Silas squeezed Mara's fingers. She looked at him and smiled. Once, she had come to Red Willow searching for a place to survive until morning. She had stayed long enough to learn that the right home did more than shelter a person from the night. It gave them enough light to open the door for someone else. Sometimes the greatest kindness is not rescuing someone, but giving them enough safety and respect to stand strong again. Mara and Silas built a home by sharing burdens, trusting each other's strengths, and leaving the door open for the next person in need. In our own lives, a small act of dignity today may become the kindness someone carries forward tomorrow. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI for entertainment, while also sharing a positive lesson about kindness, resilience, and the power of helping one another.